Um, my name is Joanna Chin. I'm a registered dietitian with the New York City Department for the Aging. You've already met Anna from our ACL grant. Joining us today is also our dietetic intern, Jolyn. And as she mentioned, our demo today will be recorded and available to view at your pleasure on our library. This event has been brought to you by the ACL Grant Virtual Smart Living Initiative in partnership with the New York City Department for the Aging. And as a quick reminder, all centers and programs should have received an email some time ago about counting virtual programming units and a memo about nutrition education. So if you have any questions about that, please reach out to your program officer or nutritionist. And it's a pleasure to have you all join us again today for our cooking demo. If you haven't heard yet, our next cooking demo will be on July 19th on a Wednesday at 11 a.m. And we'll be teaching you how to cook cold, spicy peanut noodles, which is a delicious dish to make during the hot summer months. And very easy to make, very fun. And you know, it's definitely worth trying if you've never had it before. So make sure you mark your calendars. And it's also going to be presented in English and Mandarin as well. All right, so without further ado, let's get started on making some egg frittata. A couple of ingredients that you'll need for today are obviously our 4 large eggs, some seasoning like pepper, salt. I've got 4 small red potatoes, or if you find 2 medium red potatoes, same thing. It comes out to about a handful. I've got some extra virgin olive oil, some Tuscan kale, about 2 cups. So about for every 2 eggs, you want about 1 cup of kale or greens. So it could be kale, could be spinach. I've got about a 1/4 cup of onion, which is equivalent to about half a medium onion, and half a green bell pepper. Whether it's green, red, orange, it's totally up to you. I just happen to have a green bell pepper for today. And that's it for ingredients. As for tools, you just need a chopping board, hopefully one that has a rubber backing to it so it doesn't slide. Then you need a knife for chopping, a bowl for, and maybe a fork or whisk for whisking and beating the eggs. You need about a small frying pan. A non-stick one will work best for this recipe. You could have a small pot if you choose to boil your potatoes instead of microwaving it. And and something to strain the potatoes with. So I have this tool here, which is like a small slotted spoon, or a colander that looks like this. Okay. All right. So I've already started my boiled water for the potatoes. And let that continue to simmer. So now I'm going to take my unpeeled red potatoes and we're going to chop them up into small pieces. You want them to be about each one to be about dime size, I would say. If it's too big, it's going to take a little bit longer to cook. And it doesn't have to be perfect. They could be square, they could be triangular. It's all right as long as they're small, easy pieces to cook. Okay. I'm going to continue to cut these up, and we want to keep the peel on because in a potato, half of a potato's fiber is actually in the skin. So if you remove the skin, you're losing out on a lot of those key nutrients in a potato. Yep, just like that. Sharp knives are best. Anything that's dull, you're more likely to cut yourself with. And this is definitely a lot more potatoes than you probably need. So it's up to you whether or not you want to have a higher potato content frittata. Maybe you want more greens in your frittata. That's the beauty of a frittata. It's that you don't have to follow a certain amount. It's really like, it's great for cooking any leftover vegetables you have, leftover green beans, broccoli. You can throw it into frittata. I think we're good on potatoes now. Okay, so now that that's cooked, cut, we're gonna cook these potatoes in our boiling water. Another option I mentioned was that you can microwave it, maybe like nuke it for like a minute or two until it's soft, not fully cooked, because we're gonna cook it in the skillet later. And so now that that's in the water, we're gonna let that boil for about 2 to 3 minutes. Turn up the heat, cover it, and we'll keep an eye on that. All right, so now that we have the potatoes cooking, next thing is we're going to chop up our pepper and onion. Start with the onion, we don't need the top for this. And again, same thing, dice it into small pieces. We want to keep all the ingredients a nice uniform size, that way they cook evenly. If you have a big chunk of peppers or a big chunk of onions, it may not cook at the same rate. Okay, we don't need the center of the pepper. I'm gonna set that aside. Onions here. All right. Slice this up. And then chop it into little dices. And make sure you wash your fingers. Bare claw always. Okay. So we've got our onions, our peppers cooked. I already have my kale that doesn't need any. I bought this kale already cut up, so I don't need to cut the kale up. All right, and then so now we're gonna start our skillet on about a medium high. And while that heats up a little bit, then we're going to put in some oil. And then do that. Can you see this okay? All right. So just a little bit of oil, about a teaspoon. Let that coat the bottom of the pan. And just quickly check on the potatoes, boiling nicely. That should be done in about a couple minutes. And so once our skillet is nice and hot, we'll toss in the onions and the peppers. You'll need a spatula. And so gently place it into the pan. The kale will come later since that cooks pretty quickly. And with the frittata, got lots of great nutritious vegetables going in here. So it's not just a boring omelet. And the difference between an omelet and a frittata is it's not too much different. A frittata is just a thicker form of omelet. It's thicker because of all these great vegetables and fiber that's going into it. You can also opt to make, you can add some meat to it if you want, or some tofu for some added protein. It's up to you. But in this case, we're making a vegetarian frittata today. Okay, so we'll let that sit for a bit, and that's going to cook down. It's going to, the vegetables are going to sweat, and that's when you know that it's cooking really well. All right, so while that's cooking, let's beat our egg. You just need a small bowl. One, two, three, four. All right. And I welcome any questions from the chat box or through, a lot of times the chat box, but eventually towards the end of our demo, we'll open it up to your mic to be unmuted to ask questions. But in the meantime, feel free to add any into the chat room, and our moderators will vocalize them through to me.
Okay, I have a questions here. So how many eggs can I eat per week?
Oh, great question. So with eggs, I know there's been a lot of concern about doctors in the past saying how eggs can raise your cholesterol, but over time, the American Heart Association themselves have done extensive research, and we had come to realize that you can safely have an egg or two a day, and it's not going to raise your cholesterol, because at the end of the day, it's saturated fats like butter, um, fat from meats like bacon, sausages. Those are the types of saturated fats that raise our cholesterol. And in the past, typically we're having eggs in these settings where we're having butter and bacon and sausage, and that's what caused the raise in your cholesterol. But the eggs themselves are innocent. They're an excellent lean source of protein, comes with a lot of biotin, that comes with vitamins that our body needs. So feel free to have 1 or 2 eggs a day, unless you have any reason that you're trying to avoid eggs, for instance, if you're allergic to them.
Okay, thank you for answering that.
All right, so our peppers and onions are almost done. I'm gonna lower the heat a little bit, and our eggs are beat. So I'm just going to sprinkle in some of our pepper, about a 1/4 teaspoon, and just a pinch of salt. And heat that a little bit more. Set that aside, and then check on our potatoes. Potatoes are still a little bit raw, you'll know, because as you're stirring, it feels a little bit hard to touch. So in the meantime, I'm going to lower my heat on my skillet a little bit so that this doesn't burn, and I'm going to let the potatoes continue boiling a bit. All right, and do we have any other questions from the chat room, Berlin?
Let me see. Okay, so yeah, I have one question here. Are there any substitutes for eggs?
Okay, so if you're making a recipe that normally requires an egg, there are a lot of other egg substitutes out there right now. I know personally there's one called Just Eggs that you can find at the supermarket. They use different combinations of plant proteins to mimic the consistency of eggs. So you could definitely try that. If you don't really care for the egg consistency or flavor, and you're just looking to make like a high protein vegetable casserole for the breakfast, you can always opt to use tofu, so that you have a source of protein as your frittata. All right, so I've already added the kale. I'm going to let that cook with our peppers and our onions so that all the flavors melt together. You'll notice that the kale really shrinks down as you cook it. Okay. You want to lower the heat just a little bit. So at this point, we should be on medium heat. You can always opt for also adding some cheese into this recipe too for some extra calcium. All right. Okay, and then let's see, we're gonna drain some of these potatoes and check and see if they're done yet. Actually, yes, so they're pretty done. They're nice and soft. I could squish them pretty easily, so we know that these potatoes are done. All right, so let's turn off the fire for that. And you're gonna take a slotted spoon, you're gonna drain the potatoes. We don't want too much water going into our frittata, otherwise it won't hold up very well. And you might be thinking, oh, potatoes, that's a lot of starch. Well, because we're adding the peels to it, we're getting a lot more beneficial fiber. So if you're diabetic, you're trying to stay away from carbs, always have the peel with the potato. And also you can consider making sure that your potatoes are cold when you consume them, because the starch and the glycemic index, which is the number that we use to calculate how much your sugar raises, it's actually going to be better for your sugar when you're consuming the potatoes cold versus if they're hot. Okay, so now our potatoes are ready to be put into our skillet. We're basically just piling everything into there. Mix it up a little bit. Our vegetables are all nice and cooked together. Got a lot of green going on here. And then last step is to toss our egg into here gently. And the egg will get into all the little crevices. Take your spatula and just help the egg get to all the sides. But don't touch it too much, otherwise it's gonna break apart. So now that our egg is in here, all you need is to leave it alone for about 8 to 10 minutes. You want to cover it so that it cooks all the way through. And you're gonna make sure the heat is on medium. Anything higher is gonna burn the bottom. And then once that's done, after 8 minutes or so, you're gonna end up with a frittata that looks something like this. The edges are gonna come apart from the edge of the skillet, and that's when you know it's cooled down. And you should be able to kind of move it around like this. Just slide it off the skillet. All right, and you have a frittata that can feed 4 people. You can save one for lunch or for dinner also. Great for all days, all meals in a day. And let's take a look at the center. This is a frittata I made earlier this morning. I opted for some mushrooms in this one and some cheese, but also still very full of vegetables, fiber, protein. And let's see. Take a look. Beautiful. I'm gonna look for the angle that, if you can see in the center, we've got our kale and mushrooms. We've got a nice even separation of all the eggs in there too. And yeah, and also look at the bottom. It's nice and brown, not burnt. And this is a perfectly cooked frittata. And I hope you guys enjoyed this demo. And I hope that for those of you who cooked along will enjoy your frittata as well. All right, so now I would like to welcome any additional questions, as well as if we have any other announcements coming through our moderator side. But in the meantime, I want to thank our sponsor for the ACL Grant Virtual Smart Living Initiative in partnership with the New York City Department for the Aging for sponsoring this event. And make sure to mark your calendars for our next cooking demo in July 19th, where it's going to be in English and Mandarin. We'll be making cold, spicy peanut noodles. All right, well, thank you very much. And I'm gonna pass it on to our moderator now.
Yeah, I have one question here. So what are the health benefits of kale?
Oh, great. So with kale, it's a very cruciferous vegetable. And in other words, what that means is it's very crunchy. It's very full of fiber. Fiber is great for our gut. It's great for our cholesterol, our heart. So lots of great benefits. And there's also chock full of folate and vitamins. Kale is definitely a superfood because it just has so many things that nourish us.
Okay. I have the last questions here. So how long can the frittata remain in the fridge?
All right. So let's say you had one piece for breakfast this morning and you want to save it for maybe breakfast the rest of the week. It can hold in the fridge for about 3 to 4 days in an airtight container. You can also opt to freeze them and it'll last a little bit longer. You can also, there are recipes out there for frittatas where you bake it in a cupcake tin so that you can bake them, wrap them, put them in the freezer, and you have a frittata that you can microwave at any morning of the day.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for answering all the questions.
All right, my
Thanks,
pleasure.
Jolyn and Joanna. We actually had one last question
Oh,
before I
yeah.
do our announcements. So someone asked in the chat, can one use a substitute for potatoes?
You could opt to not use potatoes if you'd like. You can also do sweet potatoes. You could do mushrooms like in this recipe here. You could do it's really up to you. Like with the frittata, you can use any ingredients you have left over if you're trying to get rid of in the fridge. Maybe you had bought a Costco chicken rotisserie chicken and you have some excess chicken. You can even throw that in there too. But yes, long answer short is that you could use mushrooms would be a great alternative to potatoes.
Thanks, Joanna. And just once again, give credit to our sponsors, the ACL grant in partnership with NYC's Department for the Aging. So thank you all for joining us today.